Oh my, it's good to be back. It's a privilege to preach to a congregation for which I have a deep affection. For you who don't know me, I was asked to be the interim pastor from 2014 to 2016, which in retrospect was simply to give Pastor Brian a little more time to dispose of his training wheels in his preparation for the role that he now assumes as your senior pastor. And I want you to know I was delighted when I heard about his selection. And I hope you'll enjoy many, many years of ministry together with him. I've recently learned that the training wheels have been reattached for another role that he is about to assume beginning in January, which is that of being a dad. And all I can say is good luck with that. You'll be doing that the rest of your life. And that leads in kind of into a summary of what I've been doing myself. Because of your wonderful affirmation of my gift of compassion for churches that are under the weather, I was asked to be the interim pastor at the Vintage Alliance Church in McKinney, Texas, after I left PCAC. A church, by the way, that was not just under the weather, it was on life support. A crisis in that church had precipitated an exodus, literally, of a majority of the congregation, and so we were left wondering whether or not the church would even survive. But God intervened in some wonderful ways, and in February of this year, they acquired a full-time pastor, Pastor Lindsay Alcasiba, who moved here with Candy, his wife, from Northern California to pastor the Vintage Church in McKinney. And not only that, but they brought her parents with them, and her brother and sister-in-law and several other family members literally uprooted from Northern California and moved to McKinney, saying to them, "We want to build the church with you." Isn't that amazing? That's just so cool. And I think that Pastor Lindsay is a perfect fit for that congregation to thrive. So now I'm left without any church to feel compassion for, unless I learn Cambodian or Spanish or some other language that I don't think I have it in me to learn. So what's taken the place of church work? In one word, it's grandparenting. I mean, this is really, you can throw that picture up if you want. We've had 3 grandkids since I last preached from this pulpit. 3, not 1, not 2, but 3. And in August, we went to be with our daughter Natalie and her husband Jeremy. They were having their second child, who was born when we were there. So I put on my own grandfather training wheels, and almost every day, regularly, I took my little granddaughter, a 2-year-old girl named Charlotte. We call her Charlie. We would go to a large playground near their home where there are swings and slides and castles and sand and all kinds of little tunnels that only little people can get through, and she just had a blast leading me into these little places where she knew I would have to practically crawl to keep up with her, and we just had a terrific time. And somewhere in our walks together, I introduced her to my companion, Tom Thumb, which is this little guy here. And so, say hi. Yeah, thanks. Anyway, she got to talking to Opa's Thumb, and so when we would FaceTime, she would want not to talk to Opa, but she wants to talk to Opa's Thumb. And so it sort of became my, I don't know what you call it, my puppet, I guess, that I used. And in fact, I think I'm really going loony, just trying to get into the mind of a 2-year-old. But anyway, I'd like for you to hear Charlotte's greeting. She would like to give a greeting.
Why is that your joke with them? You're very silly. What do you want to say to Oma and Opa?
Thank you, freedom.
Anything else? She was just sitting here saying, "And to make a video on my oppa, and to make a video on my oppa." Okay. We're distracted right now.
Crying.
You what?
Bye-bye crying.
Bye-bye crying?
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Love you. Nisi. And Alma Nopa.
Oh, shoot. Why am I doing that? I mean, you may never see her, but it is, she is amazing. And she loves to tell jokes, and she's only 2. Pretty amazing. So, in addition to grandparenting, I have also been learning how to make pizzas and Starbucks coffee at a Market Street store in Capel, Texas. I could tell you stories about that. I'm still learning the trade. Like one time I was asked to make a breakfast burrito for this fellow, and he was a regular customer, and I was so proud of myself. I put the paper down and then added the eggs and the onions and the sausage and peppers and everything. It got all there. And then I heard him say, I can't wait to see how you're going to fold that since you don't have a tortilla under the food. I said, oh, you want a tortilla with your burrito? I mean, it's just, and just a few days ago, I was trying to make a Starbucks coffee. This hotshot business guy with a cell phone did not want to get off his cell phone and was ordering something like pumpkin spice cold brew, and I just froze. I forgot how to make it. And there I was standing there holding an empty cup until finally this guy says to the manager, could you please have someone experienced fill my order? And I thought, well, now I really want to fill it, and it's not going to have pumpkin spice on top either. I mean, it's just, you think some pretty unholy things when you're put in, places like that, and I confess that. And I say that just to say this, give generously to Pastor Brian's retirement fund. And, just want to kind of throw that out there, okay? Seriously, these days I've been pondering how to navigate this chapter of my life when I'm not actively preaching and pastoring a church. And this leads me to the text that I would like us to read this morning. If you would stand, I'd like us to turn to 2 Timothy chapter 4, 1-8. If you'd stand, please, I will read this aloud. Can you put that on the screen? Assuming we have it. I want you to be able to see it. There you go. I charge you in the presence of God and of Christ Jesus, who is to judge the living and the dead, and by his appearing and by his kingdom, preach the word. Be ready in season and out of season. Reprove, rebuke, and exhort with complete patience and teaching. For the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but having itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions, and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander off into myths. As for you, always be sober-minded, endure suffering, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry. For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, not only to me, but also to all who love his appearing. May God bless the reading of this word. You may be seated. So the title of this message is In Season and Out of Season. That's primarily what I want to focus on this morning. And my first question is, what does it mean to be in season? You know, the frame of reference here for the verses that I've just read is a personal charge that the Apostle Paul is issuing to Timothy, his disciple, whom he has known and mentored since his youth. In 2 Timothy 1 verse 6, Paul writes, "For this reason I remind you, Timothy, to fan into flame the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of my hands." Now, undoubtedly, Timothy's gift was one of leadership and also preaching and teaching the Scriptures, because it required a public service of affirmation whereby he was literally anointed and had, Paul lays his hands on him in front of the congregation to affirm his leadership in that place. But there's no specific description of his gift that Paul tells him to fan into flames. And so I believe there's no reason why we cannot apply these verses to all Christians, since we have all been given spiritual gifts. We've all been given specific motivations to do certain things well. And I'm not talking about just things you do in church, but things in life. And you know what it is that fascinates you. You know what it is that you're always asking questions about because you're so curious to want to know more about it. You know what motivates you. You know what fits into your DNA. Okay? That's the frame of reference that I like to use as we look at these verses. So now again, what does it mean to be in season? The phrase "in season," I think, applies to people and not to a time. It's not about times, it's about people. We are in season when we are actually doing what we want to do. I marvel at how effortlessly, a good barista fills a customer's order. I mean, it's just an art. It's an art form. They call it muscle memory. Apparently, after you have repeated something hundreds of times, it no longer requires any thinking at all, because you have made so many lattes, you've made so many caramel macchiato drinks that you can make them while happily chatting with the customer about his or her day. Now that just blows me away. I cannot imagine that. Because every little thing I do is conscious, and I'm looking at my iPhone, what's the recipe for this thing? A barista who was assigned to train me, and he, I think he's feeling like, okay, keep going. He said he got so good at filling Starbucks orders that he looked forward to being asked to make something that he'd never made before, he said, because that's when it really gets fun. Oh, gosh. But we're in season when we're doing what we love to do, and we're highly motivated to do it. We're also in season when we feel inspired. Maybe for you it's a new idea for how to run your business. Maybe it's a mountaintop experience that you have had spiritually that just suddenly, you've been up there, you've seen the terrain, and you've seen now where you want to go with your life, and you're highly motivated, and you feel yourself accelerating, and setbacks are no threat to you. Obstacles are nothing more than just little bumps in the road. I remember a mountaintop experience I had in 1970. I was a sophomore in college that year. And I attended in December of that year the 1970 Urbana Conference on Missions for college students. And so students from all over the world came to the University of Illinois. And it was a powerful, anointed conference. And of course, I was dutifully toting my Bible around and my notebook, and I attended all the required plenary sessions and all the appropriate workshops and seminars. However, my dormitory roommates for those 5 days were not from any mold of any Christian that I had ever met before. You see, they had been drug addicts, both of them, and they'd just been Christians for one just several weeks, the other just for a few months. And they didn't know why they were there. Somebody had sponsored their attending for band, so they came. I don't think they attended a single plenary session. I'm not sure they even knew how to find the auditorium on campus. But these two young men exhibited something that I'll never forget. There was a radiance of the love of Jesus in their faces. And there was a fire that just shone from them. And they spent most of their time just walking around the dormitories, witnessing to the custodial staff and the kitchen staff and anybody who would take the time to listen to their stories of how they were at the end of their rope, and if God had not saved them when he did, they would probably not have survived. And as we lay in bed late at night, they shared their stories with me. And something was awakened in me. I yearned for the radiance that I saw in their faces. And on the bus ride home between Champaign, Urbana, Illinois, and Akron, Ohio, somewhere on that trip, I experienced what the Christian Missionary Alliance would call a crisis experience. And my life was profoundly changed. What had once been just religious duty, like having a quiet time, now became a delight. I was so inspired that I would skip classes in school and lay on my bed in my college apartment reading the Bible because it's like I had never read it before in my life. It was a brand new book. Verses like Romans 8, 1 and 2 jumped off the page at me. You see, before that time, I was motivated only by guilt and obligation and fear of condemnation. And then I read these words. There is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. For the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus has set you free from the law of sin and death. Whoa! No condemnation. Freedom from the treadmill of trying to earn God's favor and never knowing on any day whether or not I'd succeeded. And no more religion. Rather, just a real life relationship with a person. Knowing Jesus, how could I have missed it? And after college, while working on my dad's dairy farm, trying to figure out what to do with my life, one night I was helping him milk cows. He had a family farm. That's all he ever did was farm and milk cows, and that's what I did when I was home that summer. And I had the radio on, and I was listening to Christian radio. And I heard a speaker by the name of Dr. Joel Niederhood of the Christian Reformed Church, and his message was entitled, "Whatever Happened to Preaching?" And I was so overwhelmed by the content of his message that I wrote him a letter, and I said, "Dr. Niederhood, can you please send me that sermon?" You might say I milked that sermon for all that it was worth. And, a little pun in there. You get that. But I knew knew then, I mean, right then, that evening in the barn, I just broke down. And the Holy Spirit just overwhelmed me, and I knew God wants me in the ministry. And in all my churches, even in churches that were conflicted or in pain or in some degree of, in ill health, I loved to preach. And I couldn't wait for it to be my turn on Sunday. So we're in season when we're doing what we love to do, when we feel inspired, when we're doing what we're called to do. We're supposed to do this thing. And when we're in season, we're also recognized by others who know that somehow we are in season. And they affirm us, and we can't help but gain traction and accelerate. But there's another time in our lives when we're not. There's another time when we feel like we're out of season. What's it mean to be out of season? The store where I work, you can tell when produce is in season because you pick up the scent of the produce before you even get to the table where it is. It just wafts toward you. It's just a wonderful smell. It's just been picked. It's perfectly ripe. It's ready to eat. But when it's out of season, the store may continue to provide that produce. But there's no aroma from that fruit that wafts toward you. It hasn't just been picked. It was probably picked before it was ripe so that it could stand being in a warehouse for a while. Or it's from some place far away because it's not in season in North Texas. Likewise, there are periods of time in our lives when we can feel we are out of season. We don't particularly love what we're doing. We don't ooze with excitement about our work and our job. We don't feel much inspiration. The tasks that we're asked to perform don't fit the mold of our calling and our giftedness. Since coming to Texas, I have been easing into a season of life that doesn't require a seminary education to function. It does require an education, however. And I've been trying to learn skills of managing a home so that my wife can work as she travels usually every week to some other city around the country. But skills of learning to clean the house and do the laundry and using the right soap and looking for sales in grocery stores and getting on the internet and figuring out what recipes work for something that maybe I want to try. Real skill is needed, and I confess I don't really have that expertise. And when I see other shoppers pull out coupons, piles of them at the checkout counter in a store, I know I've got a long ways to go because I do not do that. I'm so incompetent making Starbucks coffee that I've resorted to taking screenshots of coffee recipes at work and then studying them during break or on Monday night while I'm watching football so I won't be under so much stress when the next person asks me to make a caramel macchiato or something. So what do we do when we're out of season? We still engage the world when we're out of season. Being out of season doesn't mean we have no purpose. What if we only did the things we felt like doing? What if we refused to do anything unless we were inspired or unless what's being asked of us perfectly fit into the mold of our DNA and our calling? If that's your MO, I promise you'll be spending large chunks of your life doing absolutely nothing. The Apostle Paul begins chapter 4 of 2 Timothy with these words, I charge you. There's an urgency. There's exhortation, Timothy, I charge you, don't let up now. Don't let your feelings dictate your obedience. You must fulfill God's purpose for your life. Even when you feel uninspired and unmotivated, there are still needs out there that you must meet. I'm putting people in your path every day. They need you. And there's more than one way to preach the gospel. You don't have to be behind a podium or in a pulpit. Timothy, finish the race. That's the thrust of everything he's saying. Timothy, finish your race. And Paul gives 3 reasons for continuing to serve when we feel out of season. Number 1, we are in the presence of God and of Jesus Christ. Verse 1. We're in the very presence of God and Jesus Christ. In other words, we're in God's line of sight. We are under his gaze. He sees us. He knows that what's being asked of us may well not be in our wheelhouse. But let me just offer a little perspective on this by asking this question. Of all the people in the world, how many get to enjoy the luxury of operating within their giftedness, within an area where they're highly motivated and inspired and called? How many? Does a single mom have that luxury? Does a person on disability have that luxury? Do people living in poverty have that luxury? Most Christians in the world don't have the luxury of operating within their giftedness most of the time. We know this is true because 2/3 of the Roman Empire in Bible times, 2/3 of the Roman world were slaves. And slaves really don't get to choose what they do. And they're not asked whether or not they want to do what they're told to do. The Apostle Paul writes in Ephesians 6, verse 5-8, "Slaves, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling, with a sincere heart, as you would Christ, not by way of eye service as people pleasers." You know what that refers to? That's where you can expect to get the attention of others because you're so good at what you're doing and you just love doing it. And they're flattered by it. No. Serve as servants of Christ. Doing the will of God from the heart. Rendering service with a good will. With a good will. As to the Lord and not to man. Because you're in his line of sight. Knowing that whatever good anyone does, he'll receive back from the Lord, whether he is slave or free. The fruit doesn't depend on being a slave or being free. The effectiveness doesn't depend on whether we're slave or free. Whether you're in season, whether you're in your wheelhouse, or completely outside your calling and motivation, serve the Lord. Second reason we must serve when we're feeling like we're not in season is this: when Jesus Christ appears, he will issue a verdict. He'll issue his judgment. He'll judge the living and the dead. And when he returns, his verdict is going to be about whether or not we served with a view to the big picture of his purposes in the world, or whether we were serving with this narrow view that only focuses on what we want to do or feel inspired or called to do. And the third reason Paul gives to Timothy to keep serving when he feels like he's not in season is this: there will come a time when people won't pay attention to our witness or message, regardless of what season we're in. The time is coming, he writes in verse 3, when people will not endure sound teaching, but having itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers who suit their own passions and will turn away from listening to the truth. In short, this means there will come a time when people will become so hardened and indifferent to the good news that even if many preachers who are all in season are preaching the gospel, the message will fall on deaf ears. So what are some practical takeaways for those of us who may feel like we're out of season? Number one, don't make a fetish of past mountaintop experiences. We don't find our meaning in life by dwelling on the past. We don't find our meaning in life by longing for the old days when people around us were seeing us at our best and when we were hitting our stride. No. We find our meaning in life by living by faith in what God promises to do for us today and tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. How's the Apostle Paul put it in Philippians 3, verse 13? No, dear brothers and sisters, I've not achieved it yet. I'm not there. But I focus on this one thing, forgetting the past. I look forward to what lies ahead. I press on to reach the end of the race and receive the heavenly prize for which God, through Jesus Christ, is calling us. That's what it means to be a Christian. And that's the only way we can finish our race, is by pinning our hope on what God promises to do for us in the next time frame, in the next situation, in the next set of circumstances. Secondly, refuse to give in to shame or embarrassment because your present circumstances don't show you in your best light. Don't give in to shame. When Paul wrote to the Philippian church, he was in prison. It's not an ideal place for a missionary to be. Not an ideal place for him to fulfill his calling. He could easily have felt like, hey, I'm out of season. I'm just wasting my time sitting here, rotting away. Listen to his words in Philippians 1, verse 20, in prison. It's my eager expectation and hope that I will not at all be ashamed of being here, but that with full courage now, as always, when I was in season. But now, as always, Christ will be honored in my body, whether by life or by death. For to live is Christ. To live is to have fruitful ministry among you. To live is to be affirmed and recognized. To live is to see this fruit. But to die is just a portal to the good place, a much better place than we can ever imagine. To heaven itself. Paul refused to be imprisoned by shame. His take on a situation is this: the best of all possible worlds can be reached from here, right here, and right now. The best possible future for me that I could ever have can be reached from here. And so he was filled with this eager expectation, and his exhortation to Timothy was this: don't shrink back from things that you don't feel inspired to do, like endure suffering, or like doing the work of an evangelist. Don't shrink back from those things. They may not show you in the best light, in your opinion, but God, if God is in it, then that experience is going to be full of surprises. He wants to knock your socks off, okay? Finally, use your in-season gifts to minister to people who cross your path here in a place where you feel like you're out of season. Use your in-season gifts to minister to people who cross your path in a place where you feel like you're out of season. A few weeks ago, I was near the end of my shift at work. I was soaking in sweat, completely stressed, worn down by all the things I've been asked to do, and there was just chaos around me. And about the only thing I enjoyed were those brief moments when I could make eye contact with a customer, sincerely greet them with a smile, and ask how I could serve them. So on one occasion, a customer came to my counter. And I smiled and offered a greeting before making eye contact. And then I looked up and I realized it was my wife, who had just come to see how I was doing. That evening, she said to me that before I knew it was her, she said, I loved your smile, and I just felt this kindness coming from you. And that really affected me. And we both began to realize, I'm still a pastor.